She said it the night she left, standing in the doorway of the house I'd spent 11 years paying for. You gave me a roof, Nathan. You never gave me a life. I've turned that sentence over in my head 1,000 times since. More than 1,000. I've turned it over in the dark at 3 a.m. in a one-bedroom apartment in East Edmonton, with a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the nightstand, and the sound of someone else's television bleeding through the wall. I've turned it over driving to job sites, waiting in line at the Service Canada office, sitting in a family court hallway watching other men in bad suits stare at the floor. I didn't understand what she meant then. I'm not sure I fully understand it now. But I know this. The sentence was a verdict, and I never got to testify. My name is Nathan Calloway. I'm 47 years old. I was born in Red Deer, Alberta, and I have spent most of my adult life believing that stability was the same thing as love. I was wrong about that. It took losing everything to understand how wrong. I met Claire Beaumont when I was 28 and she was 26. She was finishing her nursing degree at the University of Alberta and working weekends at a pub near White Avenue where I used to go with guys from my crew. I was doing structural inspections at the time for a mid-sized civil engineering firm downtown. I wasn't flashy. I drove a used F-150 and I owned one good jacket, but I showed up on time. I paid my tab, and apparently that was enough for Claire to give me her number. We were married 4 years later in a small ceremony at a lodge outside Jasper. Her parents came from Trois-Rivières. My father drove up from Red Deer. It was October and the larches were gold, and I remember thinking that I had never in my life felt so certain about anything. We had 2 children. Owen was born in 2007, Melissa in 2010. Owen has my jaw and Claire's stubbornness. Melissa has Claire's eyes and, I used to joke, my complete inability to ask for directions. For a long time we were fine. Not spectacular, fine. The mortgage got paid. The kids got to their hockey practices and their piano lessons. Claire moved up to charge nurse at the Misericordia. I made senior project engineer at 38 and thought that was the shape my life would take until I retired. I didn't see it ending. That's what I keep coming back to. I didn't see it. The signs were there, I suppose. The dinners where we talked about the kids and not about each other. The Saturday mornings where she'd be gone to yoga and I'd be gone to a job site and we'd pass each other in the driveway and nod like neighbors. I told myself this was just what long marriages looked like from the inside. I told myself we were building something. Claire filed in the spring of 2019. Owen was 11, Melissa was 8. She cited irreconcilable differences, which in our case meant she had grown into a person who wanted something different from life, and I had not noticed because I was working 60 hours a week and calling it providing. The divorce was, I don't have a clean word for it, brutal is close. I had believed going in that because I had earned the majority of our household income for 15 years, and because I had never been faithful, and because I was a present and involved father, the process would be fair to me. I was not a lawyer. I did not know what fair meant in a courtroom. Claire had retained a family law specialist named Hartman out of a firm on Jasper Avenue. I used a general practice lawyer I found through a colleague referral, a decent man named Burgess who handled mostly real estate and didn't really understand the family law side. By the time I understood the difference, it was too late to change anything that mattered. Alberta's Matrimonial Property Act divides marital assets equitably, not equally, which sounds reasonable until you're sitting across a table watching someone disassemble the last 15 years of your financial life, piece by piece. The house, which I had put the down payment on from money I'd saved for 6 years before we even met, was included in the matrimonial property. So was my pension. So was the joint savings account we'd built together. Claire got primary residence with the children. I got parenting time on alternating weekends and 2 weeks in the summer, and I got a payment schedule for child support and spousal support that left me enough to rent that one bedroom in East Edmonton and not much else. I don't blame the system entirely. I made choices that compounded. I was slow to respond to certain filings. I trusted Burgess in areas where I should have pushed harder. But I also know that I walked into that process believing goodwill would count for something, and it didn't count for nearly as much as I'd thought. What hurt most was not the money. I want to be clear about that, because I think people assume the money is the worst of it. The worst was the alternating weekends. The worst was watching Melissa fall asleep in the car on the drive back to Claire's on Sunday night, her cheek against the window, and knowing the apartment I was returning to was going to be very quiet. The worst was Owen, at 12, asking me over the phone why I didn't fight harder to stay, and not having an answer that didn't either betray his mother or destroy something in him. I managed. That's the honest word for it. I managed. I kept the job. I moved to a better apartment in Sherwood Park the following year when the support payments recalibrated slightly. I saw the kids every chance I had. I ate a lot of dinners alone and I watched a lot of hockey, and I told myself this was a chapter, not a conclusion. Then I turned 46 and my body disagreed with everything. It started with chest pressure in November. I noticed it first on a Tuesday morning driving across the Quesnel Bridge, this weight sitting behind my sternum like I'd swallowed something wrong. I assumed it was stress. I'd been overseeing a major infrastructure project for the city, a retaining wall system in the river valley, and I'd been putting in long days for months. I drank more coffee. I took antacids. I told myself it would pass. It didn't pass. In January, I was at an inspection site in Leduc County when the pressure became something else. Not pain exactly, more like the ground shifting under my feet while I was standing still. My site foreman, a veteran named Patrick Ossie, looked at me and told me to sit down before I fell down. He drove me to the Grey Nuns Community Hospital himself. I was admitted. They ran tests over 2 days, and what they found was not a heart attack. I want to be precise about this, but a significant arrhythmia with structural implications that concerned the cardiologist, a Dr. Amara Sutherland, enough that she wanted to dig deeper. She referred me to a specialist at the University of Alberta Hospital for a full cardiac workup and, as part of a broader intake protocol, a genetic assessment. I remember the genetic counselor's name, Dr. Nadia Okonkwo. She was methodical and calm, the kind of person whose presence makes you breathe more slowly. She explained that given my cardiac presentation and the fact that I had no reliable family medical history on my biological father's side, a genetic panel would be useful for understanding my risk profile. I signed the consent forms. I had known I was adopted since I was 7. My parents, Tom Calloway, retired school teacher, and my mother Margaret, who passed from breast cancer in 2014, had always been straightforward about it. I was adopted at 6 weeks old through a private arrangement, and my biological parents were, as far as anyone knew, 2 university students who had not been in a position to raise a child. I had never felt a burning need to find them. The Calloways were my parents. That was settled in my mind a long time ago. What I had not anticipated was what Dr. Okonkwo would tell me on a Wednesday afternoon in early March. She closed the door of her office quietly. She sat down across from me and set a folder on the desk between us without opening it. "Mr. Calloway, the results of your genetic panel flagged a match in our system. A first-degree relative has registered a medical profile through a linked database. A sibling match, a half-sister." I didn't say anything for a moment. She continued. "Her name is Vivienne Arsenault. She's 53 years old, based in Victoria, British Columbia. She registered a profile 2 years ago. The match is highly significant. Our clinical geneticist reviewed it this morning." "She's been looking?" I asked. Dr. Okonkwo hesitated in a way that told me there was more. "She contacted the registry actively," she said. "She indicated she had reason to believe she had a half-sibling born in Alberta in the late 1970s. She's been in contact with the registry for approximately 18 months. Then she said the part that I still hear sometimes when I'm very still. "Mr. Calloway, I want to prepare you for something. Miss Arsenault is in palliative care. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She registered with this database specifically because she was hoping to find you before." Dr. Okonkwo paused. "Her care team indicates her condition has progressed significantly. Time is a factor here." I drove home from that appointment in a kind of silence I don't have a name for. Not shock exactly. More like the moment after an impact, when the sound hasn't caught up to the event yet. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in Sherwood Park and looked up Vivienne Arsenault. I found a LinkedIn profile. She had worked for 20 years as a coastal environmental consultant based in Victoria. I found a brief mention of her in a Victoria News article from 2018 about a wetlands preservation project on the Saanich Peninsula. There was a photo. A woman with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp cheekbones, standing on a dock with a clipboard, squinting slightly into the sun. I looked at that photo for a long time. I thought about all the years she had presumably spent not knowing if I existed, and all the years I had spent not thinking about her at all. I thought about the fact that she had gotten sick and had decided that finding me was something she needed to do before she ran out of time. She had done the work of looking. She had put her name in a database and waited and hoped, and now she was in palliative care on Vancouver Island, and I was sitting in an apartment in Sherwood Park eating reheated pasta and staring at my phone. I called my kids that night. Owen was 17 by then, Melissa was 14. I didn't tell them what had happened. I wasn't ready to have that conversation, but I just wanted to hear their voices. Owen asked me if I was okay. He has this habit of reading people that he probably got from his mother. I told him I was fine. I told him I'd talk to him more soon. I called the genetic counseling office the next morning and asked for Dr. Okonkwo's contact information for the registry. I was connected within 48 hours to a social worker named Julie Fontaine, who coordinated contact between matched individuals. She was warm and careful, and she explained that Vivienne had been informed of the match and was willing, her word was hoping, to hear from me. She passed me Vivienne's number. I held it in my hand for 3 days without calling. I know how that sounds. I know how that looks from the outside. A man whose half-sister is dying, who was found after 18 months of searching, and who waited 3 days to pick up the phone. All I can tell you is that I sat with it. I'm not a quick processor, I never have been. Something that large needs time to settle before I know what to do with it. On the 4th day I called. The phone rang 4 times and I thought it might go to voicemail, and then a woman's voice said hello. It was clear and a little hoarse, and it had a slight edge to it, the way people sound when they've been in hospitals for a long time. I said, "This is Nathan Calloway. I think you might be my sister." There was a pause, and then she laughed, this short, real, slightly startled laugh, and she said, "I know exactly who you are. I've had your file on my coffee table for a month." Her name was Vivienne Arsenault. She had been born in Calgary in 1972 to a woman named Renée Arsenault, who had also, Vivienne explained in that first conversation, given up a baby boy in Edmonton in 1977. Different fathers. Same mother, same decision, 5 years apart. Vivienne had found out about me through letters she discovered after their mother Renée passed in 2020. There were medical records, an agency contact name, a reference to a private adoption in Edmonton. Vivienne had spent the better part of 2 years following paper trails and dead ends, and finally landing on the genetic registry. She told me all of this in a voice that was matter-of-fact and warm at the same time. She told me she didn't want anything from me. She said she just wanted to know that I existed and that I was okay. "Are you okay?" she asked. I laughed at that, which surprised me. "I've had better years," I said. She said, "Me too." We talked for 2 hours that first night. She told me about her work, the consulting, the decades she'd spent doing environmental assessments along the BC coastline. She told me she'd never married, that she'd had what she described as an excellent series of meaningful relationships and one extremely ill-advised camping trip. She had a son, Theo, who was 24 and worked as a marine biologist in Halifax. She told me about Victoria, about the house she'd bought in James Bay in 2003, about the garden she'd built over 20 years and was now, she said, mostly letting go of. I told her about the engineering, about the kids, about the divorce, more than I expected to. She listened without inserting herself, which I've noticed is rarer than it should be. We talked every few days after that, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, depending on how she was feeling. On her good days, she was sharp and funny and asked me detailed questions about structural engineering that she had clearly Googled in advance. On her harder days, she was quieter, and we'd sometimes just stay on the line while she looked out her window at the garden. She had a contingency trust managed by her estate lawyer, a firm in Victoria called Therio Falls. In late April, about 6 weeks after our first call, she told me she had already added me to her estate documentation. She said it the way you say a practical thing, directly, without drama. "I don't have a lot," she said. "The house, some investments, the consulting business assets. Theo is provided for. You're in there. I'm not telling you to do anything with it. I just want you to know." I told her she didn't have to do that. She said, "Nathan, I know I don't have to. That's not why I'm doing it." I didn't argue with her. With Vivienne, I learned quickly, arguing about certain things was like arguing with the tide. Vivienne Arsenault passed away on a Saturday in late June, in her house in James Bay, with her son Theo beside her, and a palliative care nurse named Erin who she'd apparently known since a volunteer stint at the hospice years before. Julie Fontaine called me about an hour after. I sat on my back step in Sherwood Park for a long time after that call. I had never met her in person. That is the fact I carry the heavy. We had talked on the phone dozens of times. We had exchanged photographs. She sent me one of herself at about 35, standing on a rocky shore somewhere on the island, grinning at the camera with her arms crossed. I sent her one of Owen and Melissa from a camping trip at Jasper the summer before. She had told me about the garden and the marine ecosystems and the disastrous camping trip. She had told me she was glad I existed. I never flew to Victoria. I had reasons, the job, the kids, the cost of last-minute flights, the sense that maybe we had more time than we did. I sit with those reasons now, and I know what they really were. They were the hesitation of someone who has learned to hold people at a distance and call it being careful. I am not going to tell you I've forgiven myself for that completely. I don't know that I have. The estate took several months to settle. Therio Falls were thorough and professional. Vivian's assets included the Jamesby house, which was assessed in the lower $700,000 range, Victoria real estate being what it is, plus a managed investment portfolio and consulting business receivables. After Theo's portion and the estate costs, my inheritance came to just under $340,000. I want to be honest here, that number changed things. Practically, concretely, it changed the shape of my life. It meant I could pay down the debt that had accumulated during the divorce years. It meant I could buy a modest house in Spruce Grove and stop renting. It meant the kids had something waiting for them when they needed it. What I did not anticipate was the phone call from Claire. It came on a Thursday evening in October, about 3 weeks after the estate distribution was finalized. I was making dinner, nothing impressive, just pasta and a jar of sauce, old habits, when my phone lit up with her name. We hadn't spoken directly in about 8 months, communicating mostly through the parenting app we'd been using since the year after the divorce. I answered. She asked how I was. We made 2 minutes of careful conversation, and then she said, I wanted to talk to you about something. About Vivian's estate. I set down the wooden spoon. She said she had spoken to a lawyer. She said that under certain interpretations of family law, assets received by one party during a period when the marriage was still, and here she paused and chose her words carefully, effectively unresolved, might be subject to review. I said, Claire, the divorce was finalized in 2020. She said she understood that. She said the lawyer had flagged some complexity around the timing of the estate and certain considerations. I told her I would pass her lawyer's name to my own counsel, and we could discuss it formally if she wanted to proceed that way. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm not trying to fight with you, Nathan. I said, I know. And I did know. I don't think Claire is a bad person. I think she was hurting financially in ways I wasn't fully aware of, and I think she made a call she regretted even as she was making it. But I also knew that what she was describing had no legal foundation. Inheritances received after a divorce is finalized are not matrimonial property under Alberta law. My lawyer, a family law specialist named Karen Whitfield at a firm on 104th Street, someone I had finally hired correctly, confirmed this within 48 hours in writing. Claire's lawyer, whoever it was, either knew this already or found out quickly, because I never heard another word about it. What I did hear about 3 weeks after that, was Melissa. She texted me on a Sunday afternoon. She was 14 and a half, and she had been closer to her mother during the divorce years, which I had always understood and tried not to take personally. We saw each other, but there was a carefulness between us that hadn't existed before 2019, a kind of managed politeness that made me sad in a very specific and constant way. Her text said, Hey Dad, are you free this week? I was thinking maybe we could get dinner somewhere. Just us. I read it 3 times. I want to be fair here. I don't know for certain what Melissa knew, or what she'd been told, or what conversations had happened in her mother's house about the inheritance. I genuinely don't know. What I know is that her timing coincided with the estate settlement, and I noticed that, and it complicated something in me. But I also know that she is my daughter and she is 14, and complicated motivations are not the exclusive property of adults. I know that she had been navigating something extremely difficult for 5 years, and that maybe, she just wanted dinner. I texted back, absolutely. You pick the place. She picked a ramen place in the Glenora neighborhood that she'd been to with her school friends. We sat across from each other in a booth and ate our noodles, and at first it was careful and a bit stilted the way it had been for a while. But then she told me about a biology project she was doing on watershed ecology, and I told her about Vivian's consulting work on coastal wetlands, which I'd been learning about in the months since her death, and Melissa's eyes went a little wide when I connected the two. She sounds like she was really cool, Melissa said. She really was, I said. You would have liked her. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry I wasn't around more, Dad. Like, the last few years. I looked at her across the booth, this kid with Claire's eyes and my inability to ask for directions, and I said, You don't need to be sorry for that. She said, I kind of do though. We talked until the restaurant was nearly empty, and they were wiping down the tables around us. I drove her back to Claire's. She hugged me in the driveway, a real hug, not the kind you give someone you're only being polite to. Owen was different. Owen had kept in touch consistently through the whole divorce. Bi-weekly calls, visits whenever he could manage around school. He was in his second year of environmental science at the University of Guelph by the time the estate settled. And when I told him about the inheritance, he was quiet for a bit and then said, Vivienne spent 2 years looking for you, and you met her by accident because your heart malfunctioned. That's about right, I said. He said, that's wild, Dad. I told him I knew. He said, are you going to be okay? I told him I thought I was going to be more than okay, which was true and also something I had not been able to say for a long time. I bought the house in Spruce Grove in February. It's a 1990 split level on a quiet street with a decent yard and a garage that I've already started filling with equipment I don't strictly need, but find deeply satisfying to organize. Owen came out in March for a long weekend, and we put up shelving in the garage together and went to a game at Rogers Center on the Saturday. I have Vivienne's photograph, the one of her on the rocky shore, in a frame on my kitchen windowsill. I look at it when I'm making coffee in the morning. I think about the 18 months she spent following paper trails through provincial records and agency contacts and medical registries, just to know that I existed and was okay. I think about the fact that she never made me feel like I owed her anything in return. I have thought about what I would do differently. I know the answer. I would have booked the flight to Victoria the day after our first phone call, before I had reasons not to, before I had accumulated enough sensible hesitation to fill a year. I would have sat in that garden with her and asked her about the wetlands and the coastline and the camping trip that went wrong. I would have let her see my face. I didn't do that. I have to carry that. But I also think, and I'm still working out whether this is wisdom or something I'm telling myself to get through the mornings, that Vivienne wasn't looking for a brother who arrived in time. She was looking for proof that she hadn't been forgotten, that the choice their mother made in 1977 had produced someone who was, as she put it that first night, okay. I hope I gave her that, even through a phone. I donated a portion of the estate, $10,000, to the Palliative Care Society of British Columbia in Vivienne's name. It felt like the closest I could get to the garden. Owen graduates in 2026. Melissa is talking about marine biology, which I suspect is not entirely unrelated to hearing about Vivienne's career. But we are something civil, careful, occasionally almost warm when it's about the kids. She never brought up the inheritance again, and I never brought up the phone call. I am 47 years old. I own a house. I have a daughter who comes for dinner now, a son who calls without prompting, and a photograph of a woman I only knew by phone, who looked for me for a year and a half because she wanted to know I was there. That is more than I had at 46. That is more than I expected to have again.